Uhel Barrickman.
Tonight we're going to talk about Glasgow as it was 50 years ago and how certain things developed from the conditions that existed at that time. To talk about and reminisce here about it are three people that were active in Glasgow at that time. Most of them are still pretty active, but not the way they were 50 years ago. On my immediate left is Robert A. Lessenberry. In the middle is J.C. Downing, and to his left is James Trigg Pace. Now, all of us are older, of course, and we are not vouchsafing for the memory of any of us. We'll do the best we can, and with four of us, since I was also here from 47 on, we might be able to come up with correct dates. But if we miss dates, it's because our memories are not as good as they once were. Mr. Lessenberry, what was the size, population-wise, of Glasgow in, say, 1946 and 47?
About 5,000.
Either one of you gentlemen disagree?
Oh, no. We don't agree.
How many grocery stores were within a block, either on or within a block of the square?
Well, on the square, we had two Houchins number 2, and there was another Houchins over in the corner where J.C. Penney is. Jimmy Hinton had a grocery down in part of the space where Transfinancial Bank is. And Doc Christie had a store that I guess some would call a grocery store or drug store. And Ms. U.W. Smith had a memorable place where we bought licorice. Only place in town you could get long stems of licorice for a penny.
And I believe A&P was on the south side of the square.
At one time they were.
Wasn't that about
Yep.
46?
Mm.
And
Yep.
all of you have forgotten Grinstead's.
Grinstead, that's
So they
right.
were within a block.
They were,
They were within a block,
East
yes.
Main.
They were within a block. Theaters, how many theaters?
2.
And
Plaza and Trigg.
You go to the plaza for a nickel on Saturday. Couldn't take anything in to eat, but you could stay all day. And then they built the plaza.
The Trigg is what you meant.
The Trigg was the first one.
Right.
Then they built the plaza, and it was kind of like the Rialto in Louisville, and it cost I think about 15 or 25 cents to go, unless you went on Saturday night, and then it cost you maybe a nickel or dime more.
Then they had bank night at the plaza. Can you remember that?
I think I was too young to remember that, but bankers had night every night, I think.
I think that instead of being pattered on the Rialto, it was pattered on Lowe's in Louisville, is my recollection.
I'll accept your correction.
And I understand that Bruce Aspey did all of that himself.
Yeah.
He didn't have any outside contractors or any outside help, that he did it all himself.
Didn't have any block grants either to build it.
No, they didn't have any block grants, that's for sure. What industries were here, if any?
Overall factory.
Anything else?
Coca-Cola.
Anything else?
In 47. When Glasgow Manufacturing opened.
About then.
Herman Heller was our first manager, I can remember.
And then I think it was here in 47, and of course you had the mattress factory.
Central Mattress.
Central Mattress Factory was here at that time. And,
Well, in Hardentown.
Yep.
and as far as I can remember, that's the only industries that were here
I believe that's right.
at that particular time. Did you have any, who was the first, and I think that you can answer this question and would be correct. Who was the first woman doctor for Glasgow, and when did she come?
I guess it was Carolyn McKinley. Came about 1953.
And in 47, and I don't know for how long, you ought to be able to say something about this, J.C., connected with the hospital. But in 47 and for several years thereafter, you did not have an anesthesiologist in Glasgow that is an M.D. You had nurse anesthesiologist. J.C., am I not correct about that?
Yes, you are correct.
Now, about when was the first time that you had a M.D. as an anesthesiologist in Glasgow?
It would be on up in the 60s, I would say. What do you think?
Well, one of the first anesthesiologists, I think, was a person named Brookie from Burkesville, whose husband was a doctor over there, but she wasn't an M.D.
Well, she was a nurse
And I can't remember who the doctor was who was the anesthesiologist or anesthetist, whichever.
I can't answer that.
Let's talk about banking at 1947 and through 50 and at that time, James Trigg.
Well, you had two banks, and the savings and loan. The savings and loan was in the basement of New Farmers National Bank at that point.
It had been in a drawer, hadn't it, up until then?
That's right. It was in the drawer to start with, upstairs.
That's right.
In Mr. Sears' office.
Exactly. Left-hand drawer. I remember.
And we remodeled. That was sometime in the 50s, I guess, when it was
Moved downstairs.
moved downstairs.
Late 50s.
It was 47, you're right. It was in Mr. Sears' desk drawer.
You call it building and loan.
That's right.
Who were your bankers in 47?
Well, you had Mr. F.J. Bowles was president of New Farmers. Mr. H. Guthrie was cashier. Mr. Sears, Sam Sears, was vice president. Rogers Dickinson was assistant cashier at that point. And I guess that was all the men that were in it. You had Alice Jewell, Pauline Elliott. Virginia Downing was working there.
We got Santa Claus.
And Jean Eaton. And that's about the extent of the employees of New Farmers. At Citizens, I would need some help there, but you had Mr. Wynn Davis.
Lula Galloway worked there.
Yeah, Eula and Vera Harlan was two others that were there.
Farmers.
And Eula had a sister then, Lula, at Citizens. Mr. Downing, J.C.'s father, was there. Wynn Davis.
George Ellis was still
George
there.
Ellis was
Senior.
Senior was, I guess, president of the bank at that point.
Was Hal Ralston on there?
No, he was down at the other bank.
Was
Hal Ralston.
Help me on who was some of the men in Citizens.
Oh, it was Alice Morris.
Alice Morris.
Guy Beatty.
Ralph Kennard.
Ralph Kennard had been in the 40s.
And then James Trigg was in all the banks. He just hop skipped back and forth.
He couldn't hold his job anywhere.
He even had to go to
made him
Barberville.
president of 4 different banks or 5.
Well, all of you have admitted your father, and he was.
No, I had his father.
He mentioned Daddy.
I missed it. I'm sorry.
Daddy was in there 42 years.
Long time.
We're talking about 50 years.
Yeah, I know, but 42 years is a long time.
When you came to Glasgow, it's 50 years ago.
And Mr. Phelan Bowles was the first fellow that I ever heard use the word revolving SOB.
Any way you looked at him.
Any way you looked at him, that's the way he was. Mr. Bowles shocked me by making that statement, but he had made a bad loan to a man over in Clinton County, which shouldn't have been made in the first place. But anyhow, it went sour, and as a young attorney representing the bank, I was supposed to collect it. And that's when he used this terminology. And normally, as those of you who knew, he was very quiet, very sedate gentleman. I never heard him raise his voice as a rule. Never heard him say an ill word about anybody. But that loan brought forth that epithet. And that's the first time I ever saw him sort of lose his cool. But he lost it when you mentioned him.
Total assets at that time was, in both banks, was less than $10 million.
You anticipated me. That was exactly.
That's your next question?
That's what I was going to ask, what the assets were at that time. And the assets of First Federal was less than that. I'd forgotten what, but...
Well, that's probably $1.5 million. You probably could, sometimes during the year, you probably could put all three of them have been less than $10 million.
But another interesting aspect of banking at that time, I thought, as far as Glasgow was concerned, your major banks didn't make home loans for building houses and so forth. That was all sent to First Federal, as far as I could tell.
Yeah, that's right.
And why, I didn't understand then, and I don't understand now. Maybe you can tell me, James Trigg.
Well, primarily because building loans had savings, which were more longer terms, and of course a home loan is for, most of them are made for 20 years. And the banks didn't like, and still don't like, to tie their money up for that length of time. A lot of your home loans now are made by banks, or initiated there and then sold off to somebody, a mortgage company somewhere.
Well, yes, but as I understand it, they could have done that then also. Didn't you have Fannie Mae and some of these other outfits at that particular time?
Not in 47. We're talking about 47.
Yeah, I know. Fannie Mae didn't come into existence until later than that.
I think I'm right on that.
I'm not sure.
As Robert said, we didn't have block grants back then.
No, he's absolutely right.
I think banks generally were very conservative. And if you had twice as much as you needed to borrow, you could get half of it. And it was not the most enjoyable thing to go to a bank and try and borrow money. And I went in probably 53, and I had gotten in the building material business and owed one invoice for $2,500, I think. And my dad asked me what day how I was going to pay that, and I said, I don't know. I guess I'll go to the bank. So I went to the bank, and I got halfway up in front of the plaza. And he called me back, and he said, how much interest are you going to pay? And I said, I guess I'll pay 6%, doesn't it? It doesn't everybody. He said, they want to charge you more than 5, don't pay it. Just tell them walk out. So I went up to see JC's daddy, and in those days, all of the conversation was taking place out in the lobby where everybody heard everything. And he was coming back from the back room, and we sat up there, and he said, what do you want? And I told him I wanted to talk to him about a loan. He said, for what? And I told him and how much. And he had to pick up the phone, and he called Wynn Davis, and he was talking to Wynn, and they were questioning whether they'll do it or not. And he turned the notepad around and had it filled out and finished talking to Wynn and said, go ahead and sign that. And I said, how much interest you charging? He said, I'm charging 6%. I said, I'm not going to pay 6%. And he said, well, you won't get it then. And I said, I don't want it. So I got up and walked out and tore him all to pieces.
Just like Daddy told you to, right?
Yeah, I did just like Daddy told me. Now it was about About 30 years later, I was at the tobacco barn, and one of the ex-directors of the bank was in there, and we were talking about the economy and the tobacco market. And he said, well, said, it's not like it used to be. And his family had been in the bank for ever since it started, I guess, or shortly thereafter. And they were, 2 or 3 of them were directors. And he said, you know, said it used to be I could go in there and see wit and I could borrow money for 4% all day.
Made your 6 look bad.
Yes, it did.
Well, the bankers were certainly more conservative back in those days than I guess than they are today. And I heard in the last 2 weeks, this man had a fellow lived on his place that he said just had the worst credit rating in town. And he says to this fellow who was telling me, ask him the question, do you think I can go to the bank and borrow $300? And the fellow says, no, you can't because your credit's no good. You don't pay anybody. He said, well, I'm going up and ask him. He said, well, go ahead. And said about an hour he came back and biggest grin on his face. And said, I said to myself, he done gone up there and conned some backer into loaning him $300. So he gets out and comes up and he asked him, well, did you get it? He said, no. They don't make $300 loans. They don't make anything less than $500. So I got the $500.
Yeah, that's cute.
And I don't know which institution he went to. I'm scared to ask.
Probably got that from a bank at the lending officer said, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir.
All 4 of us know to whom you are referring, but I guess we won't comment further.
Yes, sir.
How many warehouses were tobacco warehouses were in Glasgow at that time, J.C.?
Half a dozen.
I was going to say 7.
7?
No, farmers hadn't built in 47. There was Sampson, Wells, Planters, Glasgow Sales, and Burley, probably. Farmers was before Burley.
Yeah.
Because Willard Edwards and Paul Knuckles and Roy Payne.
But they were all built out there after 47, I
I
think.
believe they were.
Yeah.
I believe they were. Mm-hmm. Glasgow Sales was one there that presently is back of the Museum of the Barons. Ryhurst's
Right.
sports shop.
You were in banking at that time in 47 and 48 and so forth, James Trigg. You were connected with the warehouse business and other things, and what were some of the other things, J.C.?
That I was connected with?
Yeah.
In 47? Oh, I had a...
Cook, weren't
no, Cook and I hadn't hooked up.
No, even Cook hadn't hooked up at that time.
They had a Kentucky, Tennessee Tackle Company. That's the beginning of what's now Ryhurst Sports Shop. Earl Walbert and a group built some houses. What was that over on Eastview and over in there? Well, I can't think of the name of the company, though.
No,
Were you still working at Keeneland some during racing season? And
Oh, you bringing up my dark past, aren't you?
well, I don't know if that's dark past. It's legitimate.
Yes.
It won't be unless we speak about more in detail.
Jesse Reed Jolly, who was a calculator on the tobacco market, also followed the racetrack as a calculator, odds, figure.
Paul Howard Ford did that too, didn't he?
Later.
Later.
But I worked at Keeneland with Jesse Reed Jolly and Churchill Downs as a sheet writer, we called them back then. Now it's all done by computers.
And you were essentially, that is, Mr. Lessenberry, essentially in the same business you're in now, except on a much smaller scale.
I've been in it for years.
But they've expanded tremendously.
Well, it has
When
grown
you were
some.
down on Water Street, your daddy always referred to it as down on the beach.
I was down on the beach. We moved to Water Street.
After the
That's an
fire.
interesting story I'd love to tell, but I won't bore your audience with it.
Oh, go ahead and tell it. That's what we're here for.
My dad was in business right below the Plaza Theater, had a building that had a dirt driveway, one employee, one used 12-year-old truck, and the roof leaked on the building, and the floor had been caved in years gone by. And when I got out of college, I came to Glasgow, and he asked me what I thought it was going to take for me to live. And I remembered that he used to give my mother $100 a month to run the house, and that's what most women did, was run the house. And I thought, well, I guess it'd take twice that much. And since I'd gotten out of the service after a couple of years before I went to college and was getting $120 on the GI Bill, I thought surely I could get $200 and support my family, which I had a son by that time. But that was when I bought that one carload of plasterboard, it was called in those days. But we decided that it would be a wise move to expand. So after another tour of duty in Korea, I came back about 2.5 years later and went down the back lot. We didn't have a street. That was Water Street, but it was only half of a street. It was an alley on the side that didn't have water under it. And I built the building. Another fellow and I were digging the footing down there one day, and I asked him when we got to a corner, how do we square this corner? And he said, I don't know, I never did this before. So that was two of us. Well, neither of us had done it before. So we got somebody to help us get the corner squared, and we finally got the building up. That's where Travis Antique's located now. Then I made some of my neighbors mad down there because I found out from Tubby Grissom that I could petition the city council to demand the street be built. And we'd been down there for too long, several years. And so the council did that and then let each of us who were property owners pay for the street. Then the next year or two, they got a block grant to take that street from Green Street up to Liberty. And that goes under the tunnel, you know. But those were trying times. Down there I had a boy driving a truck one day who wasn't a truck driver, and I had something needed to go out in a hurry, and it was just 2 blocks over, and I told him to hurry over there and hurry back, and he was gone 15 minutes, and the tunnel was up there about a half a block. And he came walking in, and I said, have you delivered that already? And he said, no, sir. Says, you know, said, got up there and got the truck jammed in that tunnel, and said I couldn't even get out. Had to climb out the window. So we've had a great time. Been a lot of things like that happen.
That wasn't more.
No, it wasn't.
Now, you and Pace both went to Korea. How many from Glasgow were in the outfit that went to Korea?
What's say about that? 50
Not more than that.
from Glasgow?
Well, headquarters battery, I would say 75.
Okay,
I would guess, but
that's a guess.
that's a guess. Firing battery had about 140 at full strength, and I would assume headquarters had about the same number.
How long were you all over there?
About a year,
It seemed like a year. We was there
about 10 months, I guess. I was there. James Trigg probably left early.
I left as early as I could. I left in August. I left in the first group,
I left in
big group
October.
that came home.
There were some people in that unit they said were essential, and they kept them.
Oh, I see. They kept those that were essential.
That's what
Some
they
of them didn't have enough points accumulated in World War II to get out, was what the problem was.
Well, were you in the Guard? I'm talking to you now, James Trigg. Were you in the Guard when you got into World War II, or did you get in the Guard after you came back from World War II?
I got in the Guard after I came back from World War II.
How about you?
If I'd have been in the Guard before, I would have gone in as the Guard because the Guard was activated in World War II and left here. Not right, Robert?
Mm-hmm. I was naturally not in the Guard. I wasn't old enough. I was in the home Guard, and that was the fighting unit under the leadership of Roy Payne and Johnny Ritchie. And
So-
about that.
I suppose. Now you're going to have to tell some stories, and there are stories on
No.
both of those men.
I'm going to plead non-compos menace.
No,
But we had to find drills done. I learned how to do marching and right face and left face. And I was so adept when I went into service. We had 2 bus loads. Johnny Ritchie made me the acting corporal to take these records to Louisville for the draft board. And I got out of the service, and it was the first time, and went to center within a month, or 2 months, I guess. And I was walking down the street, and one of my classmates I didn't know approached me, and he said, "Were you not in the infantry?" And I said, "Yes, I was." And he said, "Well, I was too, and they want me to organize an artillery National Guard unit in Danville. Are you interested?" I said, he said, they don't walk, they ride, and they sleep in. And I said, "I'm definitely interested," because I had gotten out of the service when I was 20, and I knew if anything happened, probably I'd have to go anyway. But when I got out of college, I came home, and I told the commanding general here, Colonel Fred Gaynor, by special effort, that I would transfer to this unit from Danville if I could get the position I wanted. And he said, "Got just the unit for you." And I said, he told me what that was, and I passed. And I said, "I'm not interested." And he said, "What do you want?" And I told him, and he said, "Well, I've got a problem there." And he said, "I've got a fellow who is operations officer, and he won't go to camp." That was James Bavard. And I'm going to have to kick him out. And said, "Lauren Williams is his assistant, and I'm going to make him the operations officer. I'll let you be his assistant." Well, that was a stressful experience, but but to say the least, we made it. We sent Lauren to Fort Sill to school for 4 months, and then we got along pretty good at Fort Bragg. But it was you learn a whole lot in the service, as you well know.
Well, you were very fortunate. You don't realize how fortunate you were, because had I listened to Sam Sears and he pressured me, you would have been reporting to me or talking to me instead of Ganter.
Well, that might have been
So
all
you
right.
don't know how fortunate you were.
That might have been all right. I had that opportunity when I got out of trying to reorganize this unit. But when I transferred, the most famous words were, "Give me your papers, I'll take care of you." And when we were in Korea and the hardship discharge papers came through for others, we went in and the seats were rocking with laughter, but not a sound was made. And I sat down, and someone says, "What do you think about it?" I said, "I'll take care of you." I didn't understand what he meant. He was sitting right over at another table.
What was the chief crop after tobacco in Barron County at that time? Or the chief
I guess
farm industry?
Corn, probably.
What about farm industry? Had one thing that I remember being raised quite a bit in this county when I first came here was orchard grass, and I don't and
Seeds.
for seed, and sold for seeds. And I don't know of anybody that's raising orchard grass around here now, but there was quite a bit of it raised then.
Alfalfa took its place.
And at that time, I don't remember any soybeans in here at that time.
Not to my knowledge.
Mostly pigs and cattle and tobacco, I think.
Barron County's been historically a very diversified in its farm production of livestock and crops also. But and a lot of credit has got to be given to J.O. Horning our agricultural agent that came here in 19 and 20. And of course, in mid-40s, well, he'd been here a long time, but he was a progressive individual, and he taught a lot of farmers that fertilizer wouldn't burn the crops up, for instance. They could use it.
Probably 10 years later, it looked like we might be the chicken capital of the world, because the chicken plant we had was promoting everyone going into the raising of chickens, and then it wasn't too long until we had several bankruptcies and out of business, so it was good that it didn't get any bigger, probably.
J.O. Frank.
J.O. Frank. Jules Levinson, manager.
Right, right.
What can you tell us about the restaurant business and whether it was any better in those days than it is now?
Well, Miss Tish Holmes was probably the restaurant in town, and the lunch stand was Bill McEwen's on East Main Street. He had chili, hot dogs, and round crackers is all I remember. Cute story about Bill McEwen. My dad used to have a lot of people come by, and it would give him opportunity to pull various pranks on his friends. And my mother had been deceased 5 years before I got back here, and he didn't do much in that 5 years except just see what he could conjure up to play on his friends. The fella had a wagon load of stove wood, and he went in there and asked my dad, "You want any stove wood?" He said, "No, I've got mine for the winter," but says, "Tell you, a fella right up the street here needs some." And he says his name is Bill McEwen. He runs a hamburger stand. And I think he'd probably be at the bank now, but if you'll take that in, if he's out, just take it in there and stack it, rick it along one wall. And he did, and Bill came back, and it wasn't 30 minutes till he was down there ready to have a fight. But things like that happened all the time, and funny things that that people used to involve themselves in don't seem to evolve anymore because we're all too busy trying to get away from something else, I guess.
Another story about, go ahead.
People say don't forget about Polly Parrott's Pooh Room and Restaurant.
That's right.
On the south side of the square.
And of course, Cherry's used to have one on the square next to George J. Ellis.
That was a good restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
Cherry's Coffee Shop.
You could eat there at night.
Cherry's Coffee Shop.
Mm-hmm.
Another story about Bill McEwen was there were about 3 people that went in there, 3 men, and went in there every morning for breakfast. And Bill knew what they wanted, and he usually had it ready when they came in. And one of the 3 is still around, is Charlie T. Renfro. And he was full of devilment and jokes too, and he called the other 2 one night and told them to make a different order when they went in the next morning. And they went in, and Bill came bringing out their usual fare, and they told him that was not what they wanted, and they gave another order. And Bill refused to serve it, and told them not to come back in ever again, that your wife should get up and get your breakfast for you anyhow, and you got no business coming down here to eat in the first place. And
Well, a lot of them did in those days. You know, a lot of wives got up and fixed your breakfast. Ours quit when the children graduated from high school.
well, mine quit before then. And I may hear about that when I go home.
I imagine you would.
Well, I think 2 things we ought to mention before we get into something that we can talk quite a bit about, I guess. But in those days, and this is hard for a lot of people that are here now to believe, because I've had them tell me I didn't know what I was talking about, and of course a lot of things that I talk about, and sometimes I don't know.
We agree with that.
I knew you would agree with that. But Glasgow, at that time, was the medical center for this whole area, not Bowling Green. And you had people from Bowling Green that came to Glasgow for operations and if they had to be in the hospital and so forth. It was the medical center for this whole area, and it was also the trade center for everything east of here at that particular time. I believe you three gentlemen will agree with me about that.
You know why it was a trade center?
Well, because they had railroad
That's
in here,
right.
and they didn't have railroad in anywhere east of us until you got to Somerset.
That's right.
And another, excuse
We,
me,
as a community, I think failed in not building a road from here to Burkesville, beginning about mid-40s and early 50s and so on. And those roads were built the other side of Burkesville, went into Somerset.
Yes.
And Somerset has boomed, I think, largely as a result of those roads being built into it. And by the same token, we have failed to grow because we didn't go back and build roads for those people to come into here. Look at the road from here to Tompkinsville today. It's still...
One thing that has been apparent over history, and that is Glasgow has missed a lot of things because people were not willing to give to the cause.
Or change.
And the L&N going from Louisville to Nashville had an opportunity to come through Glasgow and Gallatin, but it went through Bowling Green. And the reason for that was that people in Warren County had bought right-of-way for a railroad, 60 miles or something, that they contributed to the need for the L&N. And for certain things like that, they relocated and went on that side. There were two choices. And then Western leaving Glasgow, which is one of the worst things that happened. And they left because of lack of support. So really, if you look at history in my memory, the only thing since then that has paralleled the need and the response has been the YMCA, because people did give to the cause sufficient to build the facility and not have any debt. But, and that was maybe a turning point, and we may wake up and be able to respond to needs in the future. But there are a lot of other needs that we could probably cite that would improve the community, although we take pride in the standard of living and the lifestyle of Glasgow and all the things we have to offer, and that's fine, but there are a whole lot more that could be offered.
Glasgow 50 years ago was also the legal center of this area. And we had as many lawyers in Glasgow then as there were in Bowling Green. And now Bowling Green's got over 200 lawyers, and the bar here is about the same size as it was then.
Is that too big, or is that about right?
You mean for here?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's about right.
About right, okay.
And the Bowling Green bar is much too large, I think, but I'm not there, so I shouldn't be saying that. But lawyers here in those days tried cases and did business in a lot of different counties, a whole lot more than we do now. And there were times when I was practicing law in the 50s and even into the 60s, where we were handling good-sized cases in 10 and 12 different counties around here. Mm-hmm. And that is no longer true of the local bar. Let's talk a little bit about, or probably the next 20 minutes, the last 20 minutes we've got, about politics and government.
Okay, before we get on a dirty subject, let me mention two other restaurants to see if any of you remember. Remember Old Reb's place?
Yes.
Corner, there's John Dickinson's office across from
Lewis and LT.
Glasgow Insurance, and Jenny Jean Taylor's coffee shop, tea shop. And now that was on South Green, about where Baker's office is.
Right.
And then there was another little tea shop up on West Washington across from the old post office. Who was in there?
Seemed like Jenny, no, that's where
Did
the
she move up
library
here?
was, Jenny Jean Jones.
No, she wasn't in the restaurant.
No, it was a.
She was home cooking for
the
Howard Malcolm.
The library. The library was next to Milo Bigger's shoe shop.
It was? Okay. There was a restaurant up there sometime,
I can't remember.
in my memory. Excuse me
But
for
there
interrupting.
was, we were talking about grocery stores earlier. A&P was on the south side in what we
Yeah.
called the Bohan building
Right.
back then.
Mhm.
T.C. Fullington
Well,
was
and then
manager.
Hill Grocery was on the north side of the square.
H.G. Hill.
That was a little before World War II was over. But Kroger's was here at one time too. Where were they?
Kroger's
Over there?
been here twice.
Yeah.
Kroger's son Moss was manager
Yeah.
of the Kroger store where you go back to the city parking lot.
That's
right
right.
in that immediate area
Yep.
there. On the north side.
I'm proud to see all of you can remember so well. Go ahead.
Did Jimmy Hinton have a grocery store?
He was down there where
in
you were at, where the
Financial
bank.
is
Right
now?
across from us.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was,
J.K. Hinton.
yeah. And then went to Bowling Green,
Right,
Yeah, that's right.
an open store in Bowling Green.
right.
They used to have a butcher at Houchins, number 2, Ray Beck, and he would get these new employees, young fellows, didn't know exactly where they were, and he would send them to another store, and he'd keep them running for 30, 40 minutes at a time looking for left-hand monkey wrenches and sky hooks and things. And on certain occasions, Mr. Houchins would inquire where all the help's gone, and Ray had them all running errands for nothing.
The first mayor I remember in Glasgow was Sewell Harlan.
Well, Wynn was a long time mayor before him. And then before him was Jim Clayton. And then I think Bryce Leach was right in there for a short period of time. Jim Clayton ran Clayton Pettigo. Weren't they still here? That might have been Ed Pettigo when you were here.
Yeah.
That was Jim Clayton lived at the corner of South Green and Leslie. House there on
House
the-
is still there.
Mhm.
Incidentally, did you have any women in business at that time?
Ms. Smoot was in the Smoot Brothers
It's
men's
George
store.
Smoot.
And I think Ms. Green and then there was a small
Abe Small.
ladies aide, and he and Philip Copel.
But
Well,
he's
wasn't-
talking about women.
Women.
more
Well, they worked in those stores. They didn't
Yeah,
own
but
the
I'm
store.
talking about owners.
No, I don't know.
than Eva Ritter.
Except those restaurants were owned by women. The two I mentioned, and the hat shop.
And when did Sarah Porter become part owner of
Insurance company.
Pettigo,
Insurance company.
Pettigo
I guess that
Rogers.
was in the
Pettigo
late
Ro-
50s, wasn't it?
that was in the late 50s, I think, or no, I believe it was before the late 50s.
John Winlock worked for her?
Yeah.
I don't remember the year of that one. We can ask Logan about that, he can tell us.
I don't, that's about the time Logan came. Just about the time Logan got here. Now, what about roadhouses? Did you have any roadhouses here then?
You
were
remember all
blessed.
them, JC.
We were blessed with them, but I'm no authority.
Well, what do you mean
had a-
by roadhouses?
We had a roadhouse going out of every road in town.
You had Shady Rest on the south, you had the Bloody Mary on
Bloody
68.
Bucket.
Bloody Bucket.
Were they not gone at 47?
Well, when was
No,
Carol
I don't
Redford-
think, somebody got shot in the one on 68 out there after 47, I believe.
When
Then they
was,
closed it.
when was Carol Redford elected judge?
I don't know. Carol Redford is the one who cleaned them out of the county.
If I had time to go to my car, I've got a fan that somebody gave me that's one of his campaign fans that tells when he ran, when he was elected, and he closed the roadhouses. And you know the irony of that election that followed.
Well, there were several. Let's leave it like that.
Well, I think we ought to talk a little.
We had good names for them too.
We ought to talk a little.
Bloody Bucket, and Brown Derby, and the Blue Goose.
Brown Derby was out there about where Barrett's office is.
Shady Rest.
Shady Rest was down south.
And they had, what about Hardentown? Did you have?
Hardentown Hill, yeah.
Now, I never was in any of those,
I wasn't
but
either.
I remember hearing others.
Just tell the audience what you're talking about when you're talking about the roadhouses that you had here.
Well, they had dancing and beverage, I understand.
Illegal beverage.
Illegal. Well, it was by consent, I think. Everybody was happy they were there, but it was not authorized.
None of us really know. All we know is we done told you all we know. The rest of it is hearsay.
Yeah.
Well,
He's trying to get us.
you can indulge in a little hearsay.
No, that's for attorneys to do.
Cherry's had a swimming pool behind their roadhouse, and it was the area swimming pool. And it was open after World War II and even open after they tore the roadhouse down. And a child visiting an aunt was drowned in there on a Sunday afternoon and led to the close of that swimming pool that was so murky you couldn't even get down under the water and see the bottom. So we, after then, didn't have a swimming pool for a good number of years.
You're talking about Judge Redford's Carroll Sr. and cleaning up the roadhouses and so forth. Then in 48, I guess it was, or 40, anyhow, he had a race, he and Phil Wilson, and he won. And then the next race, his next race was with Boots Vance, and Boots got the nomination.
And that's when Louis won.
And then Louis was the Republican nominee.
That was in 1967 when he got elected.
Governor,
Yeah, he got elected governor,
But
not
he
when he
had
was
been judge.
No,
elected.
he was elected judge,
He'd
Not
been
when he was
judge
elected
before then.
judge.
probably 10 years.
And I've forgotten who succeeded Sewell Harlan as mayor. Les Moran was in there somewhere.
Sewell was a write-in candidate,
And
ran against Wynn.
and beat him.
And Wynn had been mayor so long, it was just a commonplace understanding that he was going to be mayor. And Sewell got 200 votes and was elected mayor. And it was kind of a demoralizing thing for Wynn. And I can understand why that would happen. But after Sewell, I think Earl Walbert
No,
or Tubby Grissom.
Les was before.
Excuse me.
Les Moran was
Les,
before
and then
Earl
Earl.
Walbert, and then Earl Walbert,
And then
and
Tubby.
then Tubby.
Yeah. And then Mayfield.
And then who?
Well, you remember.
I'm not the only one that remembers.
You don't want to remember, huh?
No, I didn't say
I'm
that.
sorry for that.
I didn't say
I didn't know I was going to be humiliated on here.
that. You're not being humiliated. But
No, you know, serving as mayor, I was on the council 2 terms, and during Mayfield's regime, and said I was not going to run again. And Gilly Hyde, I think, may have been on the council at that time, and he wasn't going to run again. But because there was some undercurrent movement wanting to give away the city parking lot to someone who would pay off the remaining debt of about $50,000. And we went down there after a council meeting one night and looked at it, and we said, that's kind of foolish. Been paying on it for a good number of years. And so we voted not to do that at that time, but then there were people who were going to be running who were going to vote to do that. So I think maybe Gilly and I both agreed to run again. And as you know, when you're on there, and as the people serving today know, you get a feeling that you're so well versed on the needs of the community that you can do things that no one else will have the fortitude to do, which in some cases was true, and in some cases never does develop. but you have a certain gratification. But if you go into that office with the expectation of making everybody love you, you can't get a whole lot done. Fortunately for today's administration, there is sufficient money to do a lot of things that you and I couldn't do when we were on the city council because there wasn't any money.
I went on the city council in '53. Much to my surprise, the city did not have a budget. And had never had a budget. And bills would be paid and marked paid and tossed in a drawer. And we set up a budget while I was on the council, but it's the first time they'd ever had a budget in the city of Glasgow. And they, some of them seemed surprised when I suggested that we should have a budget. And of course, at that time, the funds for the city was in the neighborhood of $200,000 to operate the whole city. And incidentally, we haven't mentioned the fact that when 50 years ago, you could buy an automobile, a new automobile, and a good one for $1,800 or $2,000.
Oh, you could get a Ford for less than $7.
And
because we had one.
Postage is 3 cents.
Yep.
Where was that city?
Postage was 3 cents, yes,
That's where the chamber's located now. And a penny postcard cost a penny.
cost a penny.
Gasoline, 21 cents.
But it cost 11 on 7th of December 1941. Gas was 11 cents. I went up to Penny Go Brothers and filled up a cars.
We're talking about 47, it's 21, so we,
Excuse me. I'm 6 years before you. Your inflation had increased the price to 26 cents.
Yeah, the
Minimum
war,
Had you heard of the inflation by then?
Yeah.
the war had
Taking all the gas.
taken it. And of
Minimum.
course, it was during the war and so forth that they started withholding taxes. That is, the federal government started withholding taxes. Until then, taxes weren't withheld, and very few people paid income taxes because the exemption was high enough that very few people paid.
They did post the names of those people paying income tax in the post office prior to 47.
That was before they started putting up the most wanted pictures, wasn't it?
Same. It replaced the,
minimum wage is 40 cents
it replaced it.
at that point.
Yeah, minimum wage, 40 cents at that particular time. Then there was a custom here, which I thought was good custom, and I don't know but what it should have remained. Insofar as political campaigns were concerned, all the candidates went all around the county, to all the various communities in the counties and spoke. And the people enjoyed it, and I think that they got to learn more about the candidates then than they do today. And there were some very interesting races in those days, and some very interesting speeches made by various people. One of the most interesting races, I guess, was between Leonard Preston, who had been in the legislature for several terms, and Marion Vance, and that's when Marion came up with the idea of
Put the jam on the
Put the
lower
jam
shelf.
on the
jam
lower
on the
shelf.
lower shelf so the little man
man
can get
can
it.
reach.
By Pat Kingery, wasn't it?
And,
Pat
yeah,
Kingery
Pat
recorded it.
Kingery.
Pat Kingery recorded it.
Bobby
And
Bellamy's got a recording of that too, I think.
Probably was with Pat.
Marion, it was sort of an upset, but Marion won. And I've forgotten by how much, but he did win, and that was interesting. Another thing that we haven't touched on that certainly has had a bearing on the city of Glasgow and has caused more division in the city of Glasgow than anything that's happened, I think, in the last 50 years, and that was the fight between KU and In essence, I think part of it was helped organized, the other side's helped organized by the REA. At least they abetted it because there was a fight between KU and REA over territory at that particular time, and had 2 elections here. And as a result, your electric plant board was established. The KU won the first one, and next year
It was won by write-in votes. I mean by absentee ballot.
the second go-round.
Yeah.
It was that close, the second go-round. And I'm not sure that all of the feelings have healed this great day.
A lot of feelings have changed, though, on the part of some people.
But it certainly affected the community at the time, and of course has had quite an effect since. But there were 2 very emotional elections.
They were.
And you know, you've heard this old saying that politics make strange bedfellows. Now, those 2 elections got some strange bedfellows in bed together.
Tell you a cute story about that second election. We were making house calls, and we'd meet at 5 o'clock at this headquarters, and then maybe 40 people. And you'd take teams of 2, and you'd take a car, and you'd take a street, and you'd go 5 houses. And you leave the lights on, you go 5 more houses, leave the lights on. We were at a certain address in town, over kind of on the east of town, and I noticed a fella sitting on the sofa who was a little inebriated. And the doctor and I were making calls, and I said, this is going to be an interesting one, because I remembered this fella, I recognized that he was just in the store just a few days before wanting credit to buy something, and my father had had experience in that line and said, don't believe I'd sell that fellow a penny's worth. So I had advised him very politely that we couldn't extend credit. We weren't set up at that time. But his wife came to the door, ushered us in, and was very cordial and said, won't you sit down? And that fellow looked up at me, and he said, you Bob Lessenberry's boy? And I said, yes, sir. He said, get out of my house. And the fellow who was calling with me was behind me, and he broke a leg and down because he knew we were going to get shot. He said, who you for? I said, when you go to the poll, just remember, vote for Kentucky Utilities.
Well, speaking of controversy, don't forget the bypass. A little controversy there.
Well, don't forget gut chalk.
Well, yeah.
Eating axle.
The community has had its share of controversies in the last 50 years.
That was James Trigg's finest hour, was gut chalk.
But I am and have been and still am of the opinion that overall the controversies have been good for the community. And you never accomplish anything unless there is some opposition. And controversies, I think, overall are good for the community.
Strength with diversity. Yeah.
And briefly, and we're about out of time here, but briefly, some of the leaders of the community during that time was Dr. Howard, who I think was probably more instrumental than anybody else in getting what was first known as the TB hospital here.
He did that.
He was a leader. Sol Harlan was one of the leaders of the community. Wynn Davis and Preston, Leonard Preston. Go ahead.
Dr. Howard did the TB hospital through a Republican governor, too.
Yes.
Which was an accomplishment back then.
Well, he was responsible for pretty well for the whole 5 of them that was in the state of Kentucky at that point, not just Glasgow, I
right.
think.
Yes, he was instrumental in all 5 of the TB hospitals. Another leader in the community at that time was Miss Bess Howard, who was county court clerk. And as far as her political influence was concerned, it was not to be overlooked. And there were others. Those, as far as the bar was concerned at that particular time, Redford was, John Richardson, Cecil Wilson, and Terry Hatchett. And Hatchett, many of you still remember Hatchett, but there was another character. We've run out of time. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it very much. And I hope the community has gotten some enjoyment out of it.
Good night, David.